Wow, here we are again, Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. Do you know we studied many things when we were in Bible college? And in Bible college, one of the things we studied was the Jewish calendar. And in studying the Jewish calendar, we see that these people were not the same as us calendar-wise, year-wise. Their year is not the same as ours. They actually run 2 years into a calendar year sometimes. And then they have these special months, that some of their months are part of their first part of the year, but then they're a different thing as far as the spiritual side of the people go. And therefore, we're going to take a look at that. I need to get you a pencil, piece of paper, or a pen and a pad, and write these down. You may find you have a Bible with a Jewish calendar in it. But it's interesting for us to know, if we're going to study the Bible, and we're going to know that it was a certain month that we were looking at in a book. Just like in the book of Daniel, there were certain months, and those months meant something to the Jews, but didn't mean anything to those heathen kings. But to the Jews, there were high days. And like for October, September and October are 30-day months for the Jewish, on the Jewish calendar. And they are called T-I-S-H-R-I, Tishrei. And they are 30-day months. They're not either. They're 15-day months because there's 30 days in those two pieces of the month. They're pieces of month. And they are the first month of the civil year. And when it comes to the sacred year now, they are the 7th month. So they have a calendar that runs 2 lines in it. It has the civil, and then it has the the sacred month. And then the second one is this latter part of October, which is broke up. They broke October up and put part of it with November. And it has 29 or 30 days in it. And it's called the second month of the civil year. Yet it is the 8th month of the sacred year. And its name is Heshvan, Heshvan. And Heshvan is part of October and part of November. You and I have a little bit of a time understanding that. By the way, I broke my thumb, and it's kind of aggravating. I can't button my shirt right, can't get my tie on right, can't comb my hair right, can't write right. And then we go to the 3rd month, which is Kislev, K-I-S-L-E-V, which is the latter part of November and the 1st of December. Has 29 or 30 days in it. It's according to what year it is. And it is the 3rd month of their civil year, and it is the 9th month of their sacred year. And so we go to Tebeth, T-E-B-E-T-H. That is December and January, and that has 29 days in it. And that is their 4th month, and it's their 10th sacred year. 10th month of the sacred year. And the Shabbat, S-H-E-B-A-T. That's January and February. And that has 30 days in it. And that is the 5th month of the Jewish year. And it's the 11th month of the sacred year. And then we see Adar, A-D-A-R. That's February and March. That is 29 or 30 days in that. And it is the 6th month of the civil year. And it is the 12th month of the sacred year, ending the sacred year. This month Adar, let's see if I'm right now, make sure I'm right. Adar is the end of the year for the sacred year and starts a new year. Nisan, March and April, has 30 days. It is the 7th month on the civil year, and it's the first month of the sacred year. This undoubtedly was when Abraham offered up Isaac, and the calendar started. The calendar for these Jews did not really start until Abraham offered up Isaac. There's Iyar, it's April and May, 29. That is the 8th civil month, and it is the second spiritual or sacred month of the time. And then we have Sivan. That's May and June, 30 days. That's the 9th quadrum of 4, or the 9th month of the civil year, and it's the 3rd one of the sacred year. And then we have Tammuz. That's June and July, 29 days. That's their 10th quadrant for the civil year, and it's a sacred year. It's their 4th time for the sacred year. And then there's Abe. That's July and August. There's 30 days in that. It's their 11th month, and it's the 5th quadrant of the sacred year. And then we have Elul, August and September, 29 days. See, the months are split. Half of August and half of September is 29 days, and that makes their 12th month. But it also makes their 6th a spiritual year time. See, Hebrew months were alternated 30 to 29 days long. Their year is shorter than ours. It only has 354 days in it. So for every 3 years, 7 times in 10 years, an extra 29-day month, which is Vadar, was added between Adar and Nisan. So between Adar and Nisan, we have Adar there. And it was an added one to catch up with, to make the full 354-day year. Now, that is running the civil calendar alongside or above the sacred calendar. And the only way that you can get the full year in a Jewish life is by running both calendars at the same time. I don't think that the average person in the world, like myself, are that smart. But we can do it. And when we were studying this, we have in the book of Zechariah some things that I don't 100% recall as we did in the references to the New Testament passages for the cross-reference in the citations of the in the parentheses of Zechariah. We find that many of the things were written in the New Testament. The words were written in the New Testament that backed up the book of Zechariah. And for instance, we find in chapter 3 and verse 2 has something to do with the book of Jude. And let me see if I can back up here a minute and get back there to it. Chapter 3 and Verse 2. And the Lord said unto Satan, the Lord rebuke thee, O Satan. Even the Lord that hath chosen Jerusalem rebuke thee. Is not this a brand plucked out of the fire? And he's talking about Jerusalem as a brand plucked out of the fire. And you go to the book of Jude, and you can find some reference to that. So we find that the references from different things. Now the references for the calendar are in the Bible also. But we must dig some things out. They're not just prevalently showed to us. And then Jude 3 and 8, we find another one, which was where we find the reference, Jude 9 and 3 and 8 of Matthew, and 2 and 23 of Matthew. We find in 6 and 12 of John, and John 1 and 45, we find that references are there. If I was to get all of these references and give them to you, verse by verse, and quote them down here, we would have a whole book. But the book of Zechariah has maybe as many, if not more, quotes in the New Testament as any other book does. And as we study these things, we find them out. We find out that they're in here and how they work. When we went from Zechariah to Malachi, we find in Malachi, the requotes in Malachi are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 in the New Testament are quotes out of Malachi. So what are you saying, Brother Peter? I'm saying when we were in school and we were studying, it was important to look at these cross-references to find out what was used out of the Old Testament in the New Testament. What that does is that puts a lock on the Bible as the Old and New Testament being equal, being important. That the Old Testament was the forerunner to the New Testament. We actually can find all the likenesses of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament for the New Testament. We can also find the 12 apostles. We can find everything in the New Testament is covered in the Old Testament. And if you study it properly and look at it enough, you'll find out that many of the scriptures that were quoted and written in the New Testament by those that wrote the New Testament books wrote from verses in the Old Testament. I have a breakdown of a scheme for this very fact. It's called Harmony of the Gospels. And it shows the harmony, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. How that one wrote something, the other wrote something, and the other wrote something. They may not have read what the other person wrote yet, but what they wrote coincided and followed through with that. Now what I'm saying is, by looking at that in the New Testament, we also know that the New Testament coincides or harmonizes with the Old Testament. And the Old Testament quotes, many of them are direct quotes in the New Testament of what the Old Testament quoted. When you look at BC, that's before Christ. And then when you look at AD, that's after divinity, that's after Christ was done walking on the earth and he went to heaven to be with the Father. So John's ministry is AD gospel, which we talk some today in John's ministry, AD 25 to 27. And AD 27, where Jesus was baptized, Jesus was tempted, he called his first disciples, he did his first miracles, he did the first stay in Capernaum, He did the first cleansing of the temple. He was received at Jerusalem. He teaches Nicodemus about the second birth. And we see those are in AD 27. The co-ministry with John was in AD 27. And then we see where Jesus, he leaves Galilee and talks with, this is one of my favorite verses. He talks with a Samaritan woman. The disciples went around Samaria. They came back to Samaria hunting for Jesus. He's sitting at the well, talking with the woman. And they were indignant. They said, Jesus, how come you're talking with a Samaritan woman? Don't you know that's not allowed in our people today? We don't talk to Samaritans. And Jesus said that it was his duty. That's what he came for, was to do that. So, and then we see that was at Jacob's well of all places. If those disciples hadn't known, Jacob's well was a sacred place and had been throughout the years. And so they returned to Galilee. And that was in AD. AD 27 was a busy year. Was a busy time. The healing of the nobleman's son, the rejecting of Nazareth, that moved to Capernaum. Those 4 men called by Jesus would be fishermen, became fishermen again. When Jesus comes over there and says, have you caught anything? He knew they didn't because he made it that way himself. And they said, no. And he said, well, throw that net on the other side. These 4 fishermen said, man, we're almost at the beach. And he says, throw that on the other side. They throw the net over there and it catches so many fish they have to jump out of the boat. Notice now they can walk in the water. They jump out of the boat and pull the nets in. And so that's how close they were. Then when AD 27, when they went on their first preaching tour around Galilee, they healed some lepers. Their response was recorded all over the land, that what was happening. And Matthew's called. And then the disciples defended the parable. Then we go to 28, another year, AD 28, where the disciples were walking through the field and they plucked some grain up and ate it. And the Pharisees were always watching. The Pharisees, that was their commission in life, to watch Jesus and disciples and make sure they did break the law. And they did. They broke the Pharisaical law. And so, as they were on their way to Jerusalem. What for? For the second Passover, where Jesus healed the lame man. That was before they had plucked the grain. Then they plucked the grain. And then because he heals all the time. As he walks, he was healing. And it was Sabbath day. This was, not only did they pluck grain, but he plucked it on a Sabbath day. And he healed somebody on a Sabbath day. And the Pharisees were beside themselves. Why, you ought to be stoned and put away for doing this on the Sabbath day. Because they weren't allowed to do that. He had multitudes healed for a period of time there. And then the 12 apostles were selected after a night of prayer. That's a good thing. If you've got a church, you're going to put somebody else in the church in a place of position. A night of prayer would be a good thing. That's what Jesus did, and made sure that these were right to be there. That was in the middle of AD 28 when the Sermon on the Mount came, and the centurion servant was healed. The centurion came to Jesus and said, my servant. And Jesus said, go, he's fine. Where he raises the widow's son from the dead, Jesus puts John's doubts to sleep, so John would not doubt. And he said, woe unto you, woe unto those that were the privileged, and a sinful woman. Jesus anointed her, and she anointed him. Another tour in Galilee. Jesus was accused of blaspheming, and Jesus answered to a demon for a sign. Mother and brother seek audience. A mother and a brother come up, and they want an audience with Jesus. Then we saw the famous parable of the sower, and of the seed, and the tares, and the mustard seed, and the leaven, and the treasures, and the pearl of great price, and the net, and the householder. And all of those, of course, are today's. Those are today's things that are happening today with you and I. Those are prophecies that were going to take place. They took place there, and they're taking place here again in us. Some of those things. And as we went through school. I got some of the work out here that went through school, and every now and then it's good to review, to look at some of the stuff that you studied. And still in AD 28, Jesus made the sea serene. You remember? It was a storm. I mean a storm. And Jesus said, peace, be still. Just held his hand out, calmed the storm. Wow. Then we saw that demoniac in Gadara come screaming down the hill. And Jesus took care of him. And Jairus' daughter raised, and the woman with the issue of blood was healed. 2 blind men, sight was restored. The dumb demon possessed healed. Nazareth's second rejection of Christ. There were 12 sent forth. Fearful. Herod beheads John. He didn't really want to, but that was a request of somebody that he said, you dance for me like you dance, and I'll give you anything you ask. And she said, I want the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The return of 12 to Jesus, and they retires, and 5,000 were fed right there. And then they ended up, Jesus walked on the water, and the only other man in the world that ever walked on the water beside Jesus was Peter. Some people like to fault Peter because he started sinking because of his faith. Nobody else ever tried it. Nobody else ever tried it. Besides that, let me show you where you and I are today. We're following Jesus. If we do like Peter did, he took his eyes off Jesus. And he saw the water boisterous. And he started sinking. And said, help me, Jesus. He was close enough to Jesus so he could take his hand. And he took his hand and walked back to the ship with him. And let me tell you, that's how close we can be to Jesus and fall if we take our eyes off of him. Well, I haven't passed halfway through the New Testament where I was marching through on these years. Because if I got up to AD 30, we would be another half hour here. And I have that here in a graft. I don't know if you've ever seen a fishhook Bible, King James Version, the open edition, called the Fishers of Men Study Bible. It's called the Fishers of Men Study Bible. It's one of the best work Bibles that I have. I have probably 25 Bibles, and I have a lot of good work Bibles. This is one of the best work Bibles that I have, that I can get to. I can go in here, if I'm building a sermon, and draw a sermon out of this book by putting things together. And it's a red letter edition, means that the words of Jesus are written in red, and So that's what we have. And this is a Christian study outline of a Christian life study. So we can study for ourselves about our own Christian life. Yes, I went to school. I have several Bibles that have plans in them. I read those. I study those. And I like to, so they will produce to fill a need in the life of the average Christian, to provide an incentive to know more about God's holy word. They're lightly studied. They will help to establish you in the faith and give you spiritual confidence. I get all of that from the front page. And so, and if I follow through on that, I find out that there is a lot in it. And as time went on, this particular Bible right here, I haven't got it marked all the way through, but I have much of it marked where I studied it. And I studied it when I was in school. And I used it and other Bibles when I was in school. You can't ever have too many Bibles around to study, and the footnotes and the side notes and all the things that you want when you're asked a question, that you'd be able to find an answer to that question. All right, so we're going to call it a day right here, because we're up in our 26 minutes. So we will see you next time. Right. Bye-bye.